Welcome to Turn a Page, the official comic book club for Nerd Initiative. Each week, the NI Bullpen will be covering the world of comics, talking to creators, deep diving into some fantastic stories, and much more. Now let's hand it over to the team and turn a page.
Welcome to a very special edition of Turn a Page, otherwise known as a variant edition of Turn a Page, where we spotlight comic creators doing things outside the normal realm of comics or a project that we think you, the comic audience, need to have in your collection. My name is Ken M. You know me as the host of the ODPH podcast. I'm also the editor-in-chief at nerdinitiative.com. Joining me virtually, it's in his contract. He has to do his own intro.
Coming at you pre-recorded, but direct, straight from the den of Zen. My name's Off the Cuff Tom. It is always a pleasure being Nerd Initiative's pop culture connoisseur, Ken, Conor, Jibola. Always a pleasure.
Indeed. And this is a project that we are super excited to talk about because if you've been following Turn a Page, you know we've talked to the writer of this book before and teased a little bit about what's going on. And there was a little fan experience, doing a little peek behind the curtain about what we're talking about today. As I was discussing about interviews we're doing on the show with some of our loyal listeners, one in particular was like, hey, what are you talking about this week? And I said, well, we're talking to the creators about a book about FELA. I couldn't even say the whole name until he screamed, FELA Kuti! Oh my God! And literally marked out and was not stop asking information about it. And I said the easiest way I could say if you wanted to check it out is go subscribe to the Nerd Initiative YouTube and you can find out all about that in the episode, because what we're going to be talking about today is a book that is dropping on October 7th, spotlighting a revolutionary music icon whose past, present, and future legacy has been something that has been encompassing fans' attention since he came on the scene and created a new genre of music that still to this day is felt throughout the world of music. And we are super excited to talk to the creative team behind this. First, an artist who has been definitely making some noise in the art world, who has an affection for African history and North American pop culture put together. Please welcome Jibola Fagbamiye.
Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Really excited for this session today, and can't wait to talk to you guys.
Oh, absolutely. And joining him, returning to Turn a Page, one of our favorite writers in all of comics. You know his work from Assassin's Creed, Sherlock Holmes vs. Harry Houdini, Kill Shakespeare, and is somebody that really made me question when I saw a grandmother trying to give their grandson a drink this week, and I immediately want to scream, Bram, don't take it, because if you read The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal #3, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because the hit series he is behind is right now at Boom Studios and absolutely incredible. Please welcome back to the show the one and only Conor McCreery. Conor, what is going on?
Oh, thanks so much, guys. That was a great intro. You were saying one of your favorite writers, and I was looking around and being like, is somebody else coming into this conversation? Like, oh, wait. No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me back. I really appreciate it. Very excited to chat with you guys. So yeah, let's do this thing.
Hold on, before he gets started, I have to 100% agree with him. The way you did Brown Dirty.
Thank you. I just wait though. I've been putting out for people, we'll sidetrack for a second. The Last Witch is this all ages book I'm doing, and I have been teasing it, saying that this might be one of the darkest moments you'll see this year in an all ages comic until next month, until next issue.
Oh,
so that I'll just leave it at there. But yes, it's putting, my kids are mad at me. That's all I can tell you. My kids are angry at me based on how I've written this book. They've told me I'm wrong and I should change it. And when I explained to them that that's not how it works, the book has been printed and it's been sent out, they said, then burn all the copies.
I like your kids.
that is impressive. And speaking of impressive projects, FELA, Music is the Weapon, is dropping from Armistead Books on October 7th. And this is an experience. I mean, it's not even just a fantastic read. It is an experience. So let me start asking you both the question of, how did this whole project come to be?
All right. So I grew up in Nigeria, right? And I grew up about 5-minute walk away from Fella's house. So I would walk in front of the house every time I was walking home from school or whatever. And back then there were all these stories about Fella, like, yo, wait, if you ever meet Fella, he spits fire. You could get robbed in front of his house. Like, there are all these crazy stories of what could happen. But I would just walk through and I'll be scared. So I've always been fascinated about him. And then when I moved to Canada, around 2008, I saw a play, a Broadway show on Fella, and it was beautifully done. It was done by B.T. Jones. Obviously it was like a musical and everything. And I saw that, I was like, oh man, I think I can tell a better story than this. So I started working on it and I realized I wasn't that good of a writer, but I could draw, obviously, right? And so I reached out to Connor. I'd known Connor for years, and I told him, "Hey, man, I have this project about Fela Kuti, and I just need someone to sort of guide me on this project." And he was like, "Connor, I'll let him tell the story, but he'd lived in Ghana for a few years. I didn't know he knew anything about Fela, and he reacted like the person you just mentioned, like Fela Kuti, like he's like." I'm working on this with you, man. Like, we're doing this together, right? So this was around 2013, 2014. We started working on it, and I was doing the the drawing, Conor was doing the writing, but we debated back and forth on the story, the themes, and everything, and here we are.
Yeah, it was pretty like it was an interesting thing. Like for people who aren't familiar with Fela Kuti, he is a legend, right? He is one of the biggest names in music. He created the whole genre of Afrobeat. He is he's just loved. He's renowned in hip hop circles, right? Like there are so many incredible hip hop artists who have based their song on what Fela did. Miles Davis, the jazz impresario, was like, Fela's the future of music. Um, James Brown was a fan of his. Paul McCartney was a fan of his. The Rolling Stones were influenced by him. Ginger Baker of Cream, like across the board. So he's just this guy. But for people out there who like, well, can you give me a little more? We like to say he's like the Bob Marley of Africa. If Bob Marley had put out at least 55 albums, had married 28 women, 27 in one day, it was a political expression, was arrested 200 times and started his own country. That's what I had to work with as a writer when Jibola came to me. And when I first, like Jibola was saying, like I was very excited, and it was true, but it was only a few years before that I'd kind of been introduced to him. Fela's got a son named Femi Kuti. He's been a big name in world music, Femi and the Positive Force. So I knew that from my college music days. I was a college music DJ, and so I knew who Femi was, but I didn't really know much about his dad. It wasn't until I was living in Ghana, which is kind of a next door neighbor to Nigeria and West Africa, and I was at what they call a spot, so like an outdoor bar. I was drinking one of the local beers, and this music comes on. And in Ghana, they like to think of themselves as sort of the king of African music. They're the home of something called hip life and high life, which are two of the dominant, or at least were two of the dominant music types in West Africa. And this music came on, and it sounded a bit like it, but it was like different. It was jazzier and it was funkier and it was like heavier. And all these Ghanaians are getting up and they're dancing around me. And like I'm kind of looking a little confused. And so one of the guys like, "Oh, you know who this is? This is Fela Kuti." And I was like, "Oh, he's Ghanaian." And they're like, "No, he's the king. He's Nigerian." And if you don't know about the West African history or West African interpersonal political relations, which many of our audience probably doesn't, Ghana and Nigeria are kind of like Canada and America. They are friends, they get along. But if you're Nigerian/American, you're like, we're the shit. We're the best, right? Like we're the biggest. Like, we like the Ghanaians, but like we're the best. And if you're Ghanaian/Canadian, it's kind of like, yeah. I mean, the Americans and Nigerians, they're great, they're cool, we love them, but they're kind of full of themselves. And so in Ghana, it was pretty rare to hear somebody be like, "Oh man, Nigerians are the best." Usually it's like, "Oh, Nigerians are causing all the trouble. They're making things expensive or they think they're so good." And so that really stuck with me that all these Ghanaians were just like dying because they loved Fela so much. And so that's kind of when I started to dig a little bit into him. And so, yeah, when Jibola came to me, I was like, this idea you have is so amazing. And I did think about it for a while because I was like, okay, like should I get involved in this project? Am I the right guy? But Jibola and I have been friends forever, and I just really believed we could make a really not just a good book, but we could do something that was going to be hopefully like kind of culturally valuable, right? Whether you know about Fela, whether you're a huge Fela head, we hope we've attacked this story in a way that, like you guys were saying, that it does feel like an event and it feels like something bigger than just a book, because Fela is a hell of a lot bigger than just a story. He's so many stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the easiest way to describe it. Like, it is an event. It is an experience. It is not just your average graphic novel read by any stretch of the imagination.
Now, when it comes to the book itself, for, those of us, who are all here in Turn a Page, and, especially because it's one of our variant editions, when we try to highlight specifically a book, what would be the best way to pitch this out to everybody who goes, wait a minute, they're doing a variant edition. Why are they doing it? Why should they be going out and reading this book specifically?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that comes to mind is that this is just one of those stories that, even though it happened, a long time ago, it's a story of right now, right? You see all the things that are happening in the world. You see, there are less democracies in the world today than there were 5 years ago. You see the rise of authoritarianism, and there's this parallel between what's happening now and what was happening in Nigeria way back in the 70s when Fela was coming up. And, there is back then Nigerians felt a culture of doomerism. Now we feel this culture of doomerism as well, and nihilism. And you had this guy come out from nowhere that's, calling the government zombies and, like really giving them a hard time. And he made them so shook that they sent 1,000 soldiers to the house, beat him up, broke him, tried, basically killed his mom, right? And did crazy things to his friends and family. And 30 days later, comes back in crutches on stage with a bandage and calls them zombies again, and taunts them and says, "You can't stop me," right? Like that's a really punk story, and we need more of stuff like that, more stories like that. And then the second thing is that most people don't know anything about Nigeria. Most people don't know anything about Africa, right? Like Fela's quote is 99.9% of what you hear about Africa is wrong, right? And for us, what we're trying to do with this story is yes, we're telling you about Fela, who's this rebel, who's this mischief, but we're using him as a vehicle to tell you something you've probably never heard much about, right? And maybe you've heard a little bit about Nigerian history and Nigerian politics, but yeah, maybe you haven't heard a lot about Nigerian mythology or Nigerian culture in a certain way. And we're also trying to make you laugh about it too. And we also wanted to show how we love in Nigeria, how friendships are, So this full range of humanity and this whole experience really mattered, right? And yeah, that's kind of like what we want people to experience. And lastly, Fela is just such a powerhouse, and I want a lot more people to know about him, and a lot of people to experience it.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's just like, like Jibola was touching on, like we were in a period where art is resistance. Art has always been resistance, right? But Fela is such a clear example of someone who used their art as resistance, which is funny because he started off singing about soup, right? Like one of the things that a lot of people don't know about Fela is he didn't get, his mother was politicized. He grew up in a political household, but he never really thought of himself as particularly political. He wasn't really interested. I mean, he wanted to sing songs and chase ladies and like, stay up and hang out, right? Like, he's in his 20s, and he ended up going to the States where he fell in love with a woman who was a Black Panther. And she was the one who opened his door to people like, MLK, to, Stokely Carmichael, to Malcolm X, right? And changed his perspective. And so he's a really great example of a guy who suddenly switched. And like Jibola said, like, a month after literally they tried to beat him to death, he's back on stage singing the exact same song that caused these 1,000 soldiers to burn this country of his to the ground. And so yeah, I just think he's such a cool example of art as resistance, and the fact that it's never hopeless. We can always speak out for what we care about. And then I think if you were a graphic novel nerd, someone who just loves the medium of comics, I really do think you're going to love this book, just because it really is out there. I can't say everything we try works, but we have definitely tried to make this the type of book that will make you fall in love with comics again, that really respects and shows how comic storytelling is unique and how you can stretch a story in all sorts of beautiful, strange ways in comics that you can't do in any other medium. This is the kind of book that I think if you just love graphic novels, you're going to want to own, because you're going to be like, oh, this is trying to push graphic novels to the, it's trying to do everything a graphic novel can do, And I also think it's the kind of book you can hand to a friend who's like, I don't get why you're into comics. The kind of person who maybe thinks that comics are like superhero books only, right? And they don't,
Right.
that's not their genre, and that's cool, right? Not everybody has to be into superheroes. But this is the kind of book you can give to them and say, hey, this shows you that comics can do a lot of things you probably don't think. And then you can kind of reel them back into whatever your favorite story is. And maybe it is in the superhero genre, but it's that one where you're like, oh my God, it's like Red Sun or something like that, where you're like, oh, this is doing so much. And you can start them with something like FELA, and they'll be like, whoa, that was trippy. This will be the book that they're going to say, what else do you have? And then you can take that friend of yours, and all of a sudden they're going to be that person who, like, 3 times a year, you're like, you got to read this. And they'll be like, yeah, I got to read that. Because, like, I get it now. I get that this is a medium that is just, it can tell stories in a way that no other medium can. And so we tried to, we tried to do that as best we could.
Okay, well, I'm sold.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like this is actually a perfect segue to the question I was going to ask for Jibola, because right from the get-go, it's a visual experience, and especially dealing with the dream landscape of what's going on, and coming up with the images for this, portion of the story as it goes on. Where did you draw the most inspiration from? Because, like, for me, this is an opening statement that you're just like, whoa, this is not what I was expecting, but I'm locked in.
Right. Oh, that's a phenomenal question. So the ideas for the dream sequence came from so many different places, right? One of the things I like to do with my art is I like to pack in all these different references in there that are hidden, and you would have to pay attention a couple of times to be able to find it. You know, I think the biggest thing I was trying to do with the dream sequence was to make you feel like you're in this fantastic place, right? Again, like something you've never really experienced before, and for it to feel like for it to feel unexpected, right? And throughout the book, one of the things we did was the art sort of evolved throughout the book, and the dream sequence sort of evolved too, right? So we start you off with this beautiful, saturated world with pinks and blues and purples, right? And as the story goes on, it sort of gets darker and grayer, you know. So the thing I was just trying to do with that was to make it just feel introduce you to Yoruba mythology a little bit. I haven't seen it presented like that before, so I wanted to present it that way. And yeah, and I wanted it to feel magical and fantastical, you know.
Yeah, I mean that's honestly the way I took it when I first read it, because I was expecting, okay, with a biography type style, it was just going to go right into the story, and then let alone you're hit with this, and it's like, whoa, okay, wait, let me see what's going on, and it definitely has this mystique to it
Right.
that I really think adds another layer to the story, and like you touched upon, it does evolve as the story goes on and makes perfect sense to the areas it's touching upon. But right for that, for an opening statement, I just think that really jumps out at the reader. And you're instantly going, okay, this is not the normal standard comic story I'm used to. This is something entirely different.
Yeah, 100%. I think the thing we're also trying to do, just like Connor mentioned earlier, was to introduce new people to graphic novels as well, right? And to comics. So in my day job, I design apps, right? And a big part of when you're designing applications is the experience the user would go through, right? Like, oh, I want the user to feel this way. I want the user to experience these things. So I would place these buttons here or place these banners here so that the user takes these actions, right? So when I was designing the doing the art direction for the comic, it was curating that experience was a big part of it. For people who are into comics, they get it, but for people who are new into it, even just the art should carry you along, and uh, just just take you on this journey of something you've never really experienced before. And I'm glad that was the vibe you were sort of picking up as well.
Yeah, instantly.
Yeah.
to jump on top of that, as you said, the art direction itself does evolve as the book goes on. And I gotta say, when we get down to the nittier grittier things, because I mean it is a biographical book, so people will understand there have things that didn't happen. I just have to applaud the fact of the dark tones with the big neons and everything that made su such an impact, whether it was in the dream sequence or if he was inside his head or how he was perceiving things. It really was extremely impactful, especially because you saw the joy of music. My old music director, I played music for a long time when I was a kid,
Mhm.
and he always talked about the color of music. You would hear horns as yellows and oranges and drums in heavy blues and purples. I really just need to applaud the fact of how well you guys did as far as compacting that into this gorgeous graphic novel.
Oh, thanks, man. That's beautiful feedback. I think what like there's that part in the story. I'm trying not to put any spoilers in there. There's
Yeah,
that part where it gets darker, right? And one of the feelings we wanted the reader to have was for it to feel heavy, to feel
yes.
claustrophobic a little bit, right? But for there to still be hope in there, so one of the books that actually gave me a huge inspiration for that was Arkham Asylum. And yeah, because like it has sort of like the same sort of vibe where it just feels heavy, you
Yeah.
know? So yeah, I reference that a lot.
And
Now,
we also stole a bunch from King, like Ho Chi Anderson's
Yeah.
King was one. Like it's for if you don't know that book, it's a great book. Actually, another Canadian creator. Um, but there's a point, it's telling the story of Martin Luther King, and there's a point where JFK gets assassinated. And at that point, the book, which had a very like structured feel, was very like traditional comics. The panels, it's like 6 panels a page kind of thing. It was very ordered. And then JFK dies, and everything starts to just change in art style. The art style itself changes, panels start to bleed out, like it gets weird. And Ho-Chi Anderson was like, oh, like I wanted there to be this very clear visual metaphor for somebody to realize that when JFK gets assassinated, that is, in his opinion, was the beginning of the end for MLK, because even though JFK and Martin Luther King did not see eye to eye all the time, JFK did get what MLK was trying to do. And while he was not as radical as MLK was, he was not ready to maybe go as far as needed. He also didn't want to get in the way. And so when JFK dies, Anderson was like, yeah, this is like MLK lost his protector in the White House, the guy who was like, this is not a domestic terrorist. I'm not going to like stand beside everything Martin Luther King does. But, people forget, in the States, people thought that MLK was really dangerous, right? Like physically dangerous to them and their children. And JFK was actually the guy who was kind of holding back some of that like hatred and anger in the government. And so again, without spoiling it, there is a similar moment in Fela's life where this big event happens. And after that, in Jibola and I's opinion, it is sort of to say it's the beginning of the end is not right, because Fela went on for so long and created so much incredible music, but it shook him, it changed him in our opinion. It was a fundamental moment that made him a different person. And so some of the joy, like when you read this book, Bella is funny. He is profane. He's a good time, right? Like he's yelling about important things, but he loves to laugh. He loves to have fun. And after that point in the book, you see some of that joy kind of gets stolen from him. And so it was really important for us to like, what if we tried to use a visual metaphor as well? And so yeah, we tried something similar. So definitely a tip of the hat to Ho Chi Anderson's King as well.
So the book opens up with the quote, "Music is the weapon of the future. Music is the weapon of the progressives. Music is the weapon of the givers of life." What is both your interpretation on this?
Hmm. I'll make Connor go first on that
Yeah, ask the guy who wrote it. Gotcha.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, so those were Fella's words, right? So one of the things we did try to do in this book, there are a lot of times where Fella speaks in this book, and is where we could get pretty good sources of Fella having said something. We generally tried to use his words, right? And then I tried to like we read tons and tons, and we were trying to. I would when I was writing, I was trying to ape like Fella's style. So there's some things in there, that I'm very proud of as a writer, where I'm like, oh, like I feel that feels really like his voice. Now that actually was that is 100% things he said. And I mean, what Fela was talking about there was just the idea of, I'm going to get this quote a little wrong, but he talked about the idea that like musicians and artists, like they create things. And the people he was dealing with in Nigeria, these type of politicians, this military, and maybe the military in general, are about destroying things, right? And so for him, this idea that music is a weapon is because music does something that these people couldn't imagine. It is taking something that doesn't exist and it is making it whole and true and real. And with I can't think of many examples of a music, whether I like the genre or not, where I'm like, oh, that is somehow like not improving the world, right? Whether I get it or not. Like I remember, and for me, the big one I remember when I was young, I remember when Slipknot came out. I was not a industrial heavy guy at all, right? And I was kind of like, what is this, right? Like, ugh. And I remember reading an article about all these kids who Slipknot like touched, like kids who this music meant so much to them. And I remember how the band would interact with their fans reading this about it. And I just knew about these guys in the fright mask. I was like, is this just like off-brand corn? I don't know. What am I supposed to like think of here? And reading that made me go like, oh my goodness. Like, of course, these guys, this is something that is about their heart and it is hitting other people and it is creating this community. And I don't have to be part of this community to see that it is beautiful. And it just made me realize that really, like almost all music is created with beauty in mind, even if it's going through sadness and misery. At the end of the day, the person who created it, the team that created it, is trying to create beauty, even if they're getting to beauty by going through the worst of what they have ever experienced, because they know other people will be like, this is what I'm experiencing. And knowing that I'm not alone in this allows me to find some beauty in my life. And so I think that's what Phil is saying is people who make music, who draw, and you don't have to be a professional. It's just if you like to create, you are bringing beauty and you're making the world literally a better place. And so for Fela, he was always so critical of these because he's like, what are you building? You're not actually building anything that matters to people. We need to be fed as human beings. And like, hey, if you're building infrastructure stuff, that's cool. That's great. But chances are, if you're the kind of people he was dealing with, which were these repressive regimes who were beating people in the streets, who were dividing people based on their tribe, these people aren't building anything. They're barely building infrastructure, and they're certainly not building anything that's nourishing the people in their country. And that's a long-winded way to say, yeah, like Bella he's like, go out there and create, because that's what makes the world better, right?
Yeah.
There you go, Jibola. Are you happy you put me first? What are you gonna
Yeah,
how
yeah,
you gonna follow
no,
that?
all right, because you sort of inspired me there when you were speaking. I was like, oh, it kind of reminded me of that scene from V from Vendetta where V was like, artists use lies to tell the truth, right? Um, like, I always like that line. And when you think about when you have repressive regimes, the first things they ban is art, music, books. They start, they burn books, and that's happening even now in many places, right? And Fela says, we artists should use their art to tell the truth. I and in Nigeria at the time growing up, and I don't know how it was like here, but at least in Nigeria, artists were not really respected people in society per se, right? They were typically looked down on. And for Fela, the way he embraced his music and his art, and he expressed it in so many ways, and in fashion and obviously in his music. Um, the way he did it was just so heavy that it was a threat to the government. And if you were, I don't know, like if he was an engineer, I don't know how it would be a threat to the government. It could be in a more literal sense. I'm not sure, but just using his music to just sort of to bring down the government in the way he did was just it was just so powerful. And like and when Fela passed away, over 1 million Nigerians came to say goodbye to Fela, right? I think the only other people who have had that sort of honor is I think Mandela had the same thing, and also Pope John Paul, and I think Princess Diana too, right? But with Fela, in Nigeria at the time, to get people to come out like that with just people with just because of your music, it's just it's pretty hardcore stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing about it too, is just how much music has an effect on everybody.
Yeah,
It's such a universal language in its own right that
yeah,
it does connect with everybody in some fashion. And that's one thing, especially when you start walking through Fella's journey as a musician and start seeing how it
yeah.
evolves. It's something that really just encompasses the reader along with everything else that's going on.
Right, right, right.
And then through this course of the book, Fella's life takes many different turns. Is there one that you think really defines his legacy the most? Musician, revolutionary, or is there something else that really jumps out to you when you think Fella, like that's what it is after going through this book?
Yeah. So, I think his experience in LA when he went to America was it's a defining moment in the book as well, and a defining moment in his life, right? Um, so in back in the day, like when, growing up in Nigeria, Fela was actually pretty fetishized and demonized, and a lot of the stereotypes around Fela, or propaganda around Fela still exist today, right? Where he's almost sort of seen as this, I mean, he is an agitator, but very sort of negatively, in Nigeria when we were growing up. And what is interesting is when you listen to fella on you listen to any of his interviews, or if you read any of the books where he talked, you get this other side of him who is that he's this extreme empath almost, and I'm trying to make this connection that when he was in LA and he met Sandra, and Sandra told him, educated him about Black history and Black struggle and all of that, and he became sort of radicalized and felt like he had to bring that message to Nigerians. It felt like someone who was just like, oh, I feel people will really benefit from this, and never actually really thought of the negative things that could happen. It just felt, oh, I'll do this awesome thing for my people, right? And when he got this crazy pushback, he just kept going because he just felt like, my guess, it felt like that was just the right thing to do, right? So the experience in LA when he became radicalized, what I think defines a lot about Fela, because it's, yes, you have this rebel, but also this extreme empath, because it's like, oh, I'm gonna change the world. I'm gonna do something with this thing I just learned, versus, oh, I learned this thing and I'm gonna keep it for myself, you know? And I think it tells you a lot about who he is.
And he also like didn't try to commodify it, which is like
Yeah.
nowadays is like such a straight, like everything has got to be like monetized, commodified, right? Like, but he was like, you never got the sense like, I'm Bill, he had some fur coats, he bought some cars, but like he also was incredibly generous with his money, right? Like he really was one of those people who like he couldn't keep money in his hands. It was always being spent, but it was often being spent on just whoever was around it. There's a part in the book that I really love where so Fela needed to find a place to play, right? He was very controversial. People were starting to be like, we don't want you to play in our club because of what you're saying and what you're singing. And so Fela's like, I need to, and he was also like giving such a big chunk of what he was making at the door to the people who ran it. And so he was like, he was actually kind of indignant because again, he'd just come from this sort of Black power idea of like, hey, like, Black Americans need to help other Black Americans. We have to lift each other up, right? As we kind of came home to Nigeria, it was like, yeah, like as a country, we got to lift each other up. And like, wealthier Nigerians were like, shut up. Like, no, like, what are you talking about? I'm not giving, like, what do you mean? Like, why would I help you? Because we're both Nigerian. And he's like, yeah. And so he ended up building his own, his Calcutta, which was his commune. And then across the street was this, place that would be eventually become the Africa Shrine, which would become his legendary for going to see FELA. And he, helped to build that up as well. But we put a part in the book about how he shows up and there's it's not in a very good part of Nigeria, or sorry, Lagos. And, his best friend, JK, who's a constant presence throughout the book, is kind of, kind of nervous. He doesn't like being in this neighborhood. He's like locking the doors. He's like, why are we here? And Bella gets out and there's these corner boys just kind of sitting around. They've got nothing to do. They're not employed. That we're in a world that doesn't have as much employment as it needs to. And most Nigerians would have looked at these kids as these guys are thieves. They're bad news. And Bella was like, hey, I need this place cleared out. Would you guys do it for me? And they were like, okay. And Bella like pays them in advance. And the kids start to work. And his buddy JK is like, Bella, come on. Like, first of all, like, why did you show that much money in front of them? Because like they could have jumped us. And Bella's like, no, these are our people. They're not going to do that. If you're scared that they're going to do that, then maybe they'll do that. But if you're not, that's not going to happen. But JK's like, what's going to happen, man? Like, as soon as we go around the corner, these kids are going to stop working. They're just going to take the money and run off. And Bella was basically like, well, maybe not. But if they do, like, who needs the money more than them? And it's just like he just had this like generosity. He didn't try to commodify what he knew. He just really wanted to send it. And I think for me, again, a big part of the book is the idea that Fela talks about how he hates love songs because love songs are about nothing. Love is this like empty, silly emotion. And what we kind of argue in the book is that Fela was actually singing the most powerful love songs of all because these were love songs not just for his people, but these were really love songs for anybody who has been stepped on, anybody who is being oppressed in any kind of definition. And this is really what he was singing about. And that's kind of our thesis, is that the guy who hated love songs was actually singing some of the greatest love songs of all time because they're just about us as humans, seeing each other as humans. And I think for me, that's the thing that I really take with Fela. There's things he says that I would not agree with. There are things I wrote that I was like, oh man, like it's weird for you to write this because like I don't really believe, but this is what he believed. But at the same token, it was really hard for me until maybe the end of his career when he kind of went off, in my opinion, maybe lost his way a little bit. You 100% believe that he kind of wants everybody around him to be able to live the kind of life they want to without being interfered with. And in Nigeria, there was a hell of a lot of interference. But even in countries like Canada and the United States, where we've been generally blessed to have a lot of personal freedoms, there are people who don't get as much freedom as, say, I do for all sorts of different reasons. And that's really inspiring to me that Fela was just like, hey, man, like, rising tide raises all boats. Let's all do better, which is just kind of a lovely and, makes you want to get out of bed kind of sentiment.
You show a lot in the book, his defiance to quote unquote the system, the man, however, you place it. What do you think might have been some of the big double-edged sword moments for him?
I mean, I'll answer this one first. Like, so there's a part in the book where some of the band is like, you have become, and this is kind of a clean, it's like, oh, perfect. This is perfect storytelling because Fela did in some ways become what he hated, right? He was an authoritarian himself, right? Mm-hmm. He talks about how like, you can't do music halfway. You have to do it right. And so he was exacting, right? He would have people play songs over and over. And if you fucked up, like, especially because he would hold these big open rehearsals so everybody could see them like develop a song, which is something he was passionate. He wanted people to be able to see the creative process. But if you screwed up, he would be in your face. He would embarrass you. He would be furious. His band didn't get paid that great, especially later on, because he was kind of he had these bigger dreams for what he wanted to become sort of as a political figure in some ways. He was very ahead of his time in a lot of ways, but in some ways he was very of his time in some ways he was very progressive about women's rights. In some ways he was of his time, which by today's standards is quite regressive. The same thing with like, say, the LGBTQ plus like community, like that is not a place where you'd be like, oh yeah, man, Fela was like, he was on the cutting edge of, society there. Like he wasn't. And so he could at his worst be exactly what he was fighting. These autocratic, do what I say. There is one way to do it. The good thing about him is generally he was fueled by this idea of love and freedom. So his worst moments are not that bad. And there are evidence sometimes, especially earlier in his life, where if somebody was like, hey man, I think you've got it wrong, he could take a step back and be like, oh shit, maybe I do have that wrong, which I really respect about him. But I think that's the double-edged sword is you rise up to a certain level so you actually have the power to fight whatever it is you're fighting, and power corrupts, right? And so I think there was some element of that in Fela's story and in his life.
I think like even that part was just that part was innate. Like I think he was always an authoritarian, right? Like when you read his story from Reddit, like any story that I've read about fella and people who I've met that knew him were like, oh, he was just a pain in the ass kind of guy, right? Like, but also very loving and all of that, but just tough, right? I think one of the scenes that I struggled with was the scene where he like he smacked this girl, you know.
Oh, he slapped her. He slapped her.
He totally slapped. Totally slapped. I was trying to downplay it, but so yeah, this whole thing happened. He slapped this girl and then slapped this dude, right? And I was like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with even drawing this. I can't. And I was like, yeah, but that was just how things were back then too. You just have to keep it real. Like you're not going to you're not going to whitewash it. Just keep it raw and real so people feel what it was like. And I think one of the things we're trying to do there as well was for you to have this experience of dealing with someone who's totally imperfect, right? You have this hero that you're walking through and you're rooting for throughout the story, and then they do something you're like, ooh, I don't know if I'd like that, but okay. And then it keeps building, and then at some point, even you lose them. You're like, or they lose you, and you're like, I don't know if I can follow you where you're going, but then we bring you back as well. There's this thing that I read about some time ago where it's and that's one of the experiences we're trying to curate in the book. Whenever you're writing whenever you're reading a book, and one of the things graphic novels do really well is the fact that you're in a way you're also going on a journey with this character, right?
Mhm.
And for us, we created a character that almost mimics what your experience is in the book. So the character would be JK, for instance, right? And JK follows Fella throughout the book, and even at some point, you're like, oh man, like this relationship is getting strained and it's getting toxic. And uh and you get this contradiction that we were really trying to play with.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just something that really kind of jumps out too, because like I say, he is just such a complex character. And even his relationships and how you touch upon them with his friends that are really ones that are not exactly, easygoing, if you will. And then especially one that really stood out to me was Sandra and
Mm.
how complex their relationship was. When you're bringing her story to life, what do you think was the biggest challenges about connecting her with Fela to the audience?
So I think Sandra actually probably created a lot more opportunities and challenges, really. Like, because one of the things, we were talking about is like, yeah, there are parts of Fela's life where you're like, so he has this song called Lady, which is, depending how you look at it, a pretty misogynistic song, right? There's not really any way to look at it without seeing some level of patriarchy and misogyny in there, right? Like, it is literally a song about women that want to eat before men are not real ladies. They are these whitewashed Westerners who don't know their culture and they don't appreciate their culture. He has another song called Mattress, which basically is like women are there for me to lie down on and to have sex with. That is what they are for. And so Sandra was really great for us because not only does she create this connection to the United States, which obviously at the end of the day, this book is going to be sold in the United States and in Canada, and England. So we wanted to have a way that if you didn't know much about Nigeria or Fela Kuti, you could still feel that this was sort of about your history as well, right? So that was great. She could connect us there. She was the person who made Fela into a political figure in a different way, but she really gave me, and some of this is pulled exactly from their life, and some of this is are scenes we imagined. Was she gave us an opportunity to critique Fela through the eyes of today's lens, so that in the time when Fela sung "Lady," there weren't a lot of Nigerians who were like, whoa, Fela, we want to ask you, but we got some questions about your patriarchal viewpoint here, right? Like this was not a conversation that was happening at that point in time. So Sandra gave us a chance for her to be like, so what the fuck? Like, what's this? And I gave Bella a chance to defend himself. And honestly, one of my favorite scenes of the book is he goes and defends himself, and Sandra's like, all your arguments are stupid. Basically, he's like, I love women, like I love my mom, and she's like, yeah, every misogynistic asshole's got a great mother. That doesn't make you special, right? But then later you see Sandra is talking to Fela's mother, FRK, Funmilayo, who was a titan of of Nigerian politics. She was actually in the room when Nigeria negotiated their independence from England. She was the first African woman to meet Chairman Mao. She was a confidant of Kwame Nkrumah, who is the father of the Pan-Africanism, right? This idea that Africa as a continent should be coming together. So she was incredibly well accomplished. And so we got to have this great scene where she's like, I know this song drives you nuts, and I know Fela can be a pain in the ass, but he's also talking about class here. And so she goes and talks about what this song was partially about, was this idea that there were women who like worked in the market, like blue collar women who got taxed and had to like scrape and claw and were being oppressed. And the ladies that Fela was partially talking about were these women who had the means and the ability to go to England, to leave Nigeria, to live this very wealthy lifestyle, and who, when his mother was fighting to get women the vote, because they did not have the vote, she was one of the women who brought the vote to women in Nigeria. These wealthy women were like, ooh, I don't want to support this. I don't know if my husband would support this. I don't know if it's right for women to vote. And so Sandra really gave us this opportunity to try to dive deeper into some of these conversations and to acknowledge that some of what Fela said and believed was, maybe not something that I would stand beside, but that it was also more, it's deeper and more complex because, again, you're dealing with a culture, especially for someone like myself, that is not my culture. But there are nuances that I don't understand. And so Sandra was a really cool tool because I think, as anybody who's a Westerner, you can put yourself in her shoes because you also would be the outsider, right? You're not a musician. You may or may not be a Black woman, but you're like, okay, I get it. I'm seeing things the same way she is. And I think one of the things we really tried to do with this book is emphasize the universality of people. And so that we can actually relate with each other a lot more easily than sometimes I think, especially now, we are told we can. And so, yeah, Sandra was really great from that perspective and gave us a chance to just have some arguments that I don't know if we could have otherwise in the book. And she's a great character because she is this very strong, smart, sassy woman, right? In real life, that's who she was. And so she was a hell of a lot of fun to write because when she saw it, if something looked like bullshit to her, she was going to say it was bullshit. And that's always a great character to get to write.
So I'm going to call an audible on this one, Ken. With this being a biographical, graphic novel, has there been any feedback from Fela's, family? Are they aware of this? Have you gotten their blessing? It's the big question that I've been wondering after, going through all 300 plus pages on here.
Yeah, so this one's the independent project, so we're just kind of doing our own thing. We did it because we're huge fans of Fela, right? I'm pretty sure at some point we're going to be sending a copy to the family. But I kind of wanted to touch on one thing Conor was talking about regarding Sandra. One, so Sandra was a Black Panther, right? And one of the things that people don't talk too much about the Black Panthers is that their foods program, their jobs programs that they did, and you could really see the influence of that in how Fela ran the commune and we're trying to ran his Calcutta Republic. And you could see that parallel because you would notice he gave people jobs, he made sure everybody was fed and all of that. And that was just like this cross-pollination of that happened with the Black Panthers and Fela, right? And Sandra made it easy for us to make that connection of, hey, when certain things happen, things don't happen in isolation, right? They don't happen in a vacuum. Um, when because of what the Black Panthers did, it had its own influence here, back in Nigeria, and created this whole global movement on its own as well. So not to keep rambling, but like, yeah, that was one of the pieces that Sandra allowed us to. That's the character Sandra made us do, right?
So going back to me here, I think I already know the answer to this one, but Fella's had many outrageous moments in his life. Is there one as you were going through this that really absolutely floored you to discover? Because I know there was one that now seeing it pen to page, I still cannot get over. As we talked about. So, but I'll open the floor to you both about this first.
What do you think, Jibola? What's with the floors you, man? You obviously knew more about him coming in, so.
No, I'm guessing you're thinking the expensive shit.
Yes. I mean, we alluded
Hey!
to when Conor was on the show before, but I was like, "Yep, seeing this come to the light."
There you go.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
yeah, I think that was one of our favorites, but we didn't really know how to tell it, so we went through multiple iterations of it for it to feel concise and for it to work in graphic novel
Jibola kept
format,
wanting me to
right?
cut it. Jibola kept on being like, "You gotta cut it. We could do this whole thing in like, 6 pages, man." And I was like, "I don't know if we can." He's like, "No, man, it's too much." So the dirty secret of this book was, but the number one job I had on this book, it was not writing, it was not coming up with good dialogue, it wasn't research, it was meeting with Jibola every couple of weeks when he would be like, "This book is too long. This book is too. We got to shorten it up, man. I don't want to. I don't want to write. I don't want to draw these." And every time we would go in, they'd be like, "We could shorten it down." And sometimes, to be fair, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, you're right. I was rambling there. We could do this shorter." Yeah, 100%, right? 100%. But I would say there's also a good percentage of time where I'd be like, "Yeah, no, that's a really great idea, Jamal. I think you're right." But like, I mean, if we look at it from the other perspective, though, like, if we do it this way, then we would miss this, and we could do. And then by the end, Jamal would be like, all excited, like, yeah, we have to do this. And so, yeah, but at first, like, we was really, yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to cut in there just because
Yeah,
like,
the funniest part, because when I first talked to Connor about the project, I wish I mentioned this earlier. It was like, okay, it would be about 80, max 100 pages. So Connor's like, bet, I got you. So he goes away, comes back with 350 pages. I was like, dude, what is this? I'm not trying 350 pages. Are you fucking kidding me? You know? So so my whole mission was, how do I cut this thing in half? Right? Because I don't want to draw 350 pages. But every time we would discuss it, I'll go like, that's fire though. I think I got it. Like, that's good. I can't cut that. So because we went from scene to scene, and every new scene, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna cut this in half. But then most of the time I actually end up adding more to it. Right. I'm like, oh dude, we missed this other thing. So yeah. But our next project is going to be less than 300 pages for sure.
We have that on record, folks. We're going to hold you to it. Okay.
I'm not doing 350 pages again, man.
So in the sake of brevity, okay, because we don't want a 300 and something odd pages long answer, okay. At the end of this, what is the biggest takeaway you want the reader to have? One sentence. Go. I got him.
yeah, Jesus, one sentence. You're
So
vicious, Tom.
One sentence is brutal.
I mean that is tough, Tom. I mean there's a lot.
This is a good challenge.
Okay.
This is a good challenge. No, this is a good challenge. Okay, so I would say, I mean, I think, yeah, if I was going to say one thing I want people to take away, I really do think that Fela's life and this book is meant to be a celebration of just the flawed nature of us, right? Like even we spend some time with our villain. Like we do try to humanize everybody in this story. There are very few villains, like true villains. There are some. There are very few true villains in life. And our heroes are always flawed, and that's okay. And having a little more grace and understanding is so key to living a good life. And yeah, if you really run into a real asshole in the immortal words of Fela Kuti, like fuck them. But really, mostly, it's like we could all stand to be a little kinder. And despite the fact that Fela fought tooth and nail, despite the fact that he drove people up the wall and made big mistakes himself, I really do think he loved people. I think if he was going to walk into the room, he was someone who was going to fall in love with the people in the room. It's just the way he moved through life, and that to me is beautiful. More than one sentence. Maybe there's a lot of commas and semicolons, but
that was
one
totally
thought.
a sentence, man.
There's a bunch of semicolons. Parentheses.
It's like the end of Billy Madison. At no
just
point in that
okay.
entire rambling answer did you make anything resembling a point. You received no points. I think God have mercy on your soul.
I would say my attempt at one sentence, that it's an invitation for people to learn more about Nigeria, to learn more about Africa, and to learn with an open mind, and not just to see the struggle, but the whole story.
Yeah, very well said. Because honestly, trying to sum up Fela's life is no easy task, because it is one that really will take you on a journey. And that's why we can't emphasize this is not your normal read. This is an event, this is an experience. This is one that you definitely want to throw on some of his music for. In fact, I'll even kind of piggyback into a final question for you both. If there is one song that our listening audience, whether they're watching on YouTube or on podcast form, should go download while they're reading this book from Fela, what song is that and why?
Okay, I will do the basic dude answer on this one, and Jibola can do the deep cut. I will say Zombie. It is probably the song that he's best known for. It is really, I would say it's one of his most accessible songs. My kids love it. When I was doing this book, I would put on this music, and so my kids will come up like, Alexa, play Zombie, right? And sometimes we get the Cranberries, but that's okay too, because that song's fire too. But yeah, I would say put on Zombie. It is a great encapsulation of just what makes his music so fantastic.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna say Watano Get Enemy, because that's also a very
I also
easy
love that
accessible one. Yeah, so that's a good one. A deep cut one will be Look and Laugh, right? Look and Laugh is kind of almost like a spiritual song, very meditative. It's long, it's 30 minutes long, but it just takes you in, and these horns, like, it's so mesmerizing. I think if I think the second half of this book, just pop in, Look and Laugh, and just enjoy it.
There's going to be a lot, I think, fans are going to really dig into this. And especially if you're not familiar with the world of Fela Kuti, this is a perfect gateway into his life. You're going to see many different aspects of an artist that really went outside of the normal musician's life and really became an icon for a lot of people, and a voice of hope too, especially with how he progressed through his life. Fela Music as a Weapon is coming out on October 7th. We have the links to that in this podcast episode and on YouTube, so you want to make sure you go buy it. Jibola and Conor, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show. We wish much success for this, and definitely look forward to talking to you guys down the road.
Thank you so much, guys. And I think we actually did forget one last just little piece of inspiration, which is, of course, the Dewey Cox story, Walk Hard.
That's true. Legendary. But thank you guys for having us. Really appreciate the questions. Those are great questions. And hope to do this again sometime.
Absolutely. We definitely have to do this again too, and catch up after the book comes out, which everybody that can't stress enough, October 7th, circle the date, get to your bookstores, make sure you have copies lined up and ready to go for you, because this is an experience you don't want to miss. So on behalf of Tom and myself, we want to say thank you for checking out a variant edition of Turn a Page, but we'll end it like we always do at the show. When you're at the bookstores and you have a great book in your hand, such as Fela, Music is a Weapon, and you see somebody struggling to find something, hand them a copy. Tell them to turn a page. We'll see you next time.
I'm out.
It's such waste of time, swiping left and swiping right on people you could know. 'Cause anyone who's worth a damn be worth way more than a picture could ever show. You could find the right light, find the right angle, and never find your soul. And it can feel like a losing battle, and this plot is full of holes. one way of finding love just makes me feel so alone. And I can't be the only one sick of staring at my phone. So look up, talk to me, a better way to spend our energy. Just look up, talk to me. We don't have to float alone on the open sea. Don't know that I believe in the old time fable. Everyone has just one true love. All I know is you're across this table, and you're all I'm thinking of. So look up, talk to me, a better way to spend our energy. Just look up, talk to me. We don't have to float alone on the open sea. Talk to me. Talk to me. It's such waste of time, swiping left and swiping right on people you could know. Whoa.